with us. Let me know if you can hear me properly. Please pop in the chat box where you're from, where you're joining us from in the world. Charlotte's just popped a hello in there. Hello to Egypt. Thank you so much for joining us today. So today is the last of our 4 Raising a Reader webinars that we've been running over the last week. Hopefully there's a few of you that have joined us for every session, which would be fantastic. Or if this is the first session that you're joining, that's great. We're glad that you're joining us. Anyway, so great to see everyone. Lots of people saying hello. That's great. Hi, everyone. So a big thank you to Charlotte Rance, who's hosting today's session. She's hosted all of our Raising a Reader sessions this week. So if you've joined us for the previous sessions, you'll be very familiar with Charlotte by now. So yeah, if this is the first session you're attending, hello. The session today will run for an hour. At the end of the session, you'll automatically receive a certificate. And then within the next 24 hours, we'll send you the slides from the Charlotte's presentation and a link to watch the session again. And you can share this with your colleagues or watch it again if you think you missed anything. And yeah, so you will receive a certificate at the end of the session. Thank you, Casper. It's a very nice comment. 4 brilliant days. So please do use the chat box. I can see everyone doing that already, so that's great. Pop any questions you might have in there. And without further ado, I will pass on to Charlotte. Enjoy, everyone.
Is on. Okay, hello everybody. Can you hear and see me? Okay, give me a yes in the chat box and tell me, what can you see to your left? I have an empty cup of tea to my left. I will have another one when I get finished with the session. So our session today is all about readers for life. How can no, I can't see the tea either. It's an empty cup. Sad times. Yes, some vitamins. Excellent, very good. All right. So, readers for life. Today, we are going to be talking about what we can do to ensure that love of reading lasts. So, we've mainly been focusing on the classroom so far, but right now, we're going to be thinking about that school home connection. So, just to get us warmed up, I've got a question for you. What are your childhood memories of reading? What do you remember about reading in your childhood? Maybe it was trips to the library, maybe it was reading with your parents, maybe it was reading independently. For me, one of my biggest childhood memories of reading was that moment when my mum would come into my bedroom, tell me good night, switch off the light trip, and I'd put my head under the covers with my little torch and just keep reading. And I'm sure my mother knew that I was reading past my bedtime. But for me, it felt like a big secret, like I was doing something naughty just because I couldn't finish my book. My grandma reading before we sleep. Oh, yes, my grandma used to read to me too. I loved Gulliver's Travels with my late mum. I loved the theme and colours, not fixated on the vocabulary. Absolutely. Mum reading to me in bed. Oh, Metop says reading the calendar pages. Fantastic. Someone who used to do the same as me. Your grandparents' library. Ah, Rima, what kind of books did your grandparents have in their library? Reading Tintin. Fantastic. Colorful illustrative books. Absolutely. Would you say that your childhood memories of reading are generally positive, or would you say that there were memories of stress and anxiety as well? Let's see. Ah, wonderful. A girlfriend I had many years ago got me into reading novels. Always good to find a girlfriend who likes books. That's what I say. Um, Turning to a page in the encyclopedia and reading at random. I bet that must have been really interesting. What a lot of things to learn. 100% positive opened up the world. Brilliant. Yes, very positive memories. Fantastic. I'm not good at socializing though at school. Yeah, but books can be a fantastic way of socializing and meeting new friends as well. Susan says you still have the books. Fantastic. Recently, my mother went up into her attic and found a lot of her books, a lot of my books from when I was a child, because my brother's 3-year-old has just started to learn how to read. So now I'm seeing all of my old books going to my niece. It's very exciting. Yes, positively addicted for sure. Goodness me. Oh, Rima, lots of selections. Arabic literature, and interesting that Lord of the Flies has stood out to you as a memory. Good. Getting bored about books in middle school because we were not allowed to choose them. That's a really good point, Liliana. I think that's probably true of all of my education, getting bored about the books that I have to read and rather to spend my time on the ones I want to read. Oh, it's so nice. I could sit here and read all of your memories for days, but let's have a look at what we are doing in our session. We could talk about this for a whole hour. Yes, bless every mum. Agreed. Every mum has given us something fabulous. All right. So, we are going to be looking at the following things. First of all, we're going to talk about reading at home versus reading for homework. Are they the same thing? Are they different things? How can we stop reading being homework? We're then going to move on to what it takes to become a lifelong reader. And then we're going to spend some time thinking about what we as teachers can do to support parents. And finally, how we can monitor that progress. So, I'm going to give you a little quote. And I'd like you in the chat box to tell me what this quote means to you. Here's the quote. It's from a children's author called Emily Bookwald. She's a wonderful author. You should have a look at her kids' books. And she says, children are made readers on the laps of their parents. So, what does that mean to you? And do you agree? Ooh, Tapu coming in really quickly. Reading begins at home. Absolutely. Readers are not born. Agreed. We have to become readers, don't we? Anything else? Straight out agreement there from Susan. Yep, that is so true. Um, yeah, reading habits start from parents' encouragement. Absolutely. If you take the time out to read to your children, they'll grow up to read and enjoy reading. Like parent, like child. Absolutely. Parents are the role model. Um, Learn by copying what parents do. Absolutely. Ooh, good point, Metap. Absolutely. Yes and no. You can agree and you cannot agree. You can't impose reading on children, Metap says. At least parents can teach them to appreciate books. Yeah, I think so. I would absolutely agree with that. Um, we talked a little bit earlier last week in some of the earlier sessions about how reading is a learnt process. You know, if you leave a baby in a room with a book, will it read independently? No, we have to teach that. Um, and this quote to me, I think, really resonates in so many different ways. Coming back to the point on imposing reading on children, absolutely. But parents can teach them to appreciate books. How can parents do that? Well, a few of you have mentioned modeling behaviors. Um, for children, yeah, and I'm sure you remember this, and I'm sure those of you with your own children will agree. Quite a lot of childhood is spent trying to grow up. All we want to do is become adults, wishing our childhoods away. Ironic, because by the time we are adults, we wish we were children again. Um, so, one of those adult behaviors that children mimic early on is reading, the act of picking up a book, the act of moving pages. Books to children, while they are learning before they can read, they're an unknown territory full of ideas. And the more often children see their parents modeling, the more motivation there is for the child to start picking up. Ruby has made a wonderful point. Reading is also a bonding experience with parents and children. For sure, for sure. Some of my best childhood memories are connected to reading with my mum, reading with my grandma, even reading with my grandfather, who used to read basically mechanical books to me because he was a mechanic and that's what he was interested. Mechanics and computing books were what I read with my grandfather, whereas my mum and my grandma told me stories. Yeah, oh, wonderful. Shireen mentions reading aloud on the balcony, letting everybody hear stories. For sure. So, if we agree that reading at home is an important part of developing a love of reading, then what can we do to stop reading at home becoming reading for homework? So, another quick question to the chat box. What's the difference between reading at home and reading for homework? Um, does it involve reading different materials? Does it involve using different reading skills? How would you define the difference? Okay, so reading for homework is mandatory versus reading at home is reading for pleasure. Okay, all right. At home, you read what you want. Yep. Reading at home can be extensive reading, and for homework is intensive. Agreed. Leisure reading versus reading to do an assignment, for sure. Um, it's already been mentioned in the chat box that when you are told what to read, it often isn't quite necessarily what you would choose for yourself. So, as Sheila has said, reading from home is enjoyable reading. Reading for homework, not so enjoyable. Yes, okay. It is interesting, Debbie, that you have such contrasting experiences there. All right. So reading for homework will align with the school curriculum for sure. Okay. I think we'll come down here then on the differences between extensive and intensive. So if you remember in our very first session, if you were in our very first session, we talked a little bit about the difference between intensive and extensive reading. Extensive reading, reading for pleasure, reading material that is easy for you to understand. Intensive reading is reading for a learning purpose. Um, so often, that might be reading to learn a new grammar point, for example, or to learn specific vocabulary items. It might be reading to learn about another subject area, etc. Um, reading for homework is temporary, but reading for pleasure is a lifelong habit. Absolutely. And I think that we can also talk about the pressure that goes along with that. Um, reading for homework can feel very, very pressurized. Whereas when we're reading for ourselves, reading for pleasure, it tends to be a relaxing activity. When you're reading for homework, someone will be measuring what you are doing, marking what you are doing. If you're reading at home, you may, just for pleasure, you may not talk about the book you are reading at all. And of course, we can come down on those materials now. As you've rightly said, when you're reading at home for pleasure, you can read whatever is interesting to you. In the chat box, what are you currently reading? I am reading. I'm a little bit strange at the moment. I'm reading a non-fiction book, which is not my typical reading, but it's very, very interesting. It's all about flags and borders and geography and how geography impacts social interactions. Very interesting. Um, we all read lots of different things. So, in the chat box, what are you currently reading for pleasure? How does it make you feel? Ooh. So, Shireen's reading about Queen Elizabeth. Hamilton the Revolution. Ah, is that the book that the musical was based on, I wonder? Non-fiction book by Margaret Atwood. Yeah, I read that non-fiction book too. Um, the Reader's Digest, fantastic. Books about botany. Yeah, we all read different things for pleasure. Whatever we are reading, we've chosen it typically for ourselves. Maybe our friend have recommended it. When we're reading for homework, it's usually something that the teacher has done. So, if we want to encourage reading in English at home for pleasure, how can we do it? Aha! Okay, all right, good to know. I've not read either of them, but I did like the musical. Okay, cookery books, fabulous. So, how can we stop reading at home becoming reading for homework? Well, number one, first thing we can say is take that stress away. Keep it relaxed. Keep it relaxed. So, what does that mean? Well, it means taking the pressure away. Um, yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about making sure that we're comfortable having a nice time of day for reading, a time of day where we have no other pressures to read, not setting tasks, not asking questions, keeping it nice and relaxed. Number two, of course, is giving the children agency. We've talked about this a lot already last week, but worth reiterating for the people that were not in previous sessions. When children are choosing what to read, if we want them to read, we want them to have their opportunity to read for themselves. So, agency, how much they read is up to them. We're not saying you must read one chapter or two chapters a week. If we're reading at home and relaxed, read as much as you want to. Um, Give them the opportunity to choose their materials. As we are seeing, we've got lots and lots and lots of different tastes and interests, and the same is true for the kids in our classes. Make reading accessible. Absolutely important. You know, we cannot give the children the choice and the agency they need unless they have access to books and opportunity to read. And of course, the one thing that we as teachers can do is make sure that we're providing the appropriate support and the appropriate guidance that they might need and that the parents might need as well. So let's have a look at how we can get that going. Here is a lovely picture of a kid in a tent with a book. Um, let's start by talking about the parents. Let's start by talking about the parents. So, in the chat box, um, how do parents, in your experience, feel about reading in English with their children? So, we've got parents around the world, we've got teachers in a wide range of countries here. So, thinking about your students and the parents of your students, how do they feel about reading in English with their children? Um, Mariam, I see your question. I'm going to come back to that a bit later on, if that's all right with you, but I will make a note of the question. So, Feroz says parents think it's challenging. Can you expand on that a bit? Why do they find it a challenge? What else can we say about these parents? What is the challenge that they are facing? Lots and lots of different things that might come out of this one. Okay. All right. So, okay, they don't have time. They don't have enough English. Um, Susan says, unfortunately, not many parents make the time to read with children due to the pressures of work, etc. Yeah, absolutely. I think some parents feel they're not fluent themselves in English. So, how does that impact them then, Abdullah Aziz? Does it mean that they don't? Does it mean they're uncomfortable? Does it mean they avoid it? Yeah, non-English speaking parents don't feel comfortable. They think that they cannot follow the kids if they give them English books. Fair enough. If I don't understand the book, how can I support my child reading? It's a completely understandable question. Shy about it because of pronunciation and fluency. Ooh, interesting point coming out here. Parents think it's the school's responsibility to teach reading, and a few are not well educated in that respect. Yeah, I think that's true, certainly here in the UK as well. Parents who potentially feel that, we are sending our children to the school so that they can become educated. It is not my responsibility. For me as a parent, it can be difficult to set aside the appropriate time. Absolutely. Some of them were not read to. They repeat the cycle with their kids. They prefer their children reading to them. Okay, fantastic. So, I think what we should start with saying for yes, it is harsh for us sometimes. It's not an easy life being a teacher, is it? So, I think the first thing that we need to address is that idea of the anxiety that comes along as a parent, especially if you are a non native speaker of English and a parent teaching a child or working with a child who is reading in English. We have a lot of anxiety with parents about whether they are reading right. Am I doing this the right way? And I think really what most parents ought to be concerned about is whether not whether they are doing it right, but whether they are doing it. Number one. So, quite a lot of points coming out here. I think Barathi has made a really good point here. Parents want to take the role of an assessor rather than a supporter. Yeah, they feel like, okay, if I'm reading at home with my child, they need to be learning something. And I think we need to take away that stress a little bit. So if we can remove the anxiety, how can we relax into reading? Well, three key areas. First of all, of course, we've already said it, is modeling. Um, Modeling is a key point. We're not asking them to teach reading. We're asking them to be present for reading. And I think a lot of parents feel that that pressure comes because they don't know what to do. So, what should we encourage? Well, I think firstly, getting the message through that it doesn't matter what they are reading, simply reading in front of their child is a good step. Um, Next point, of course, is comfort. Comfort is important for relaxation. Wherever you like to read best, in a park under a tree, in bed in a comfy pillow, in a tent in the living room or in the back garden, in a book fort, snuggled up under a blanket. These are all wonderful places where reading can happen. And I think one message that we can give to parents is, find a quiet time, sit down together, let your child pick up the book they have taken from the library or from school that they're interested in reading or from their own collection. You pick up your book and sit down and just have 15 minutes of reading time. This can be a huge step forward and a huge relaxation of that anxiety, getting that message through. And of course, consistency of reading time. Many of you have already mentioned that memory of reading before bed, very, very common here in the UK as well. And a regular reading time is quality parent child time. One time I remember with my mum would be getting into bed with her on a Sunday morning, and she would read me Thomas the Tank Engine books every Sunday morning. I guess she wanted a lion. My adult perspective here says that. But for me as a child, it was a magical time being able to get there, read my book with my mum before our day starts. And of course, as we see, linking those positive experiences has an echo throughout your lifetime. We all look back and we remember those moments. So instead of re sort of re what's the word? My words aren't working today. Must be a Monday thing. Instead of reinforcing that anxiety that parents get, step one to becoming a lifelong reader is, of course, to make sure that they have a nice, relaxed environment to start with. Now, the next thing, of course, that we have to address is choice. Choice is important. But what are the challenges? Well, depending on where you are in the world, access is a challenge. If you're in a non native English speaking country, access to books in English can be even more challenging. Books can be expensive. Parents, of course, have other priorities. We are living in unprecedented times where costs are rising, global shortages of all sorts of things are putting extra challenges. Having access to books is a luxury. So, what can we do? How can we ensure children have access to books that interest them at an appropriate level? Okay, back over to you in the chat box. Where do children get their books from? What access is available to children for English books in your country? Is it limited to just schools? Do libraries, for example, do public libraries have English language books available? Is there anything else we can do? What are your ideas? Okay, so limited public library, yes. Fantastic. So donations, exchanges, great ideas coming up. School library, public library, online libraries, absolutely. Parents may well bring up the question of, is reading digitally the same benefit as reading a physical book? I'd be I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Um, I also have some opinions, which I will share in a moment. Mobile libraries, fantastic, brilliant ideas. Okay, lots of good things coming up in the chat box as always. All right, so donations from expats, yep, absolutely. Brilliant. So, how can we get access? Well, a few options that we can consider. Few options that we can consider. Things that we can encourage with parents. Things that we can encourage with parents. Number one, best recommendation is to have a range of books available. So, whether they are in the school or at home, that's fantastic. If you've got the resources to pick up some nice new or secondhand books and have a range of books at home, fantastic. If we don't, book swap parties, other parents, these can be organized by the school. They can also be organized by the parents themselves, getting kids together, getting them to bring in old books that they have read, things they are not interested in anymore, swapping with a friend, getting different things. Book fairs, fantastic idea. If you are lucky to have book fairs that come round to your school or to your town, you can get some nice options. Oh, brilliant. Russell mentions an NGO that sells books which are cheap. Fabulous. Aha. Okay, so online books, a mixture of physical and digital books. Fabulous. If you've only got access to digital books, it's generally better for the kids to be reading something rather than reading nothing. I would argue there is a certain importance to making sure that children have access to physical books just to get used to the feel of a book, just to get used to the idea of turning pages. But I would rather a child was reading than not reading at all. So if digital books are what we've got. There's not going to be any harm. They're just going to be enjoyable and able to read them. And I noticed someone shared a wonderful children's library in the chat box. So if you noticed that, that's a good one. Um, Another way that we can encourage access is, of course, through children's book clubs. Book clubs can work in several ways. Typically, we'd be looking at everybody in the book club reading the same book at the same time. But these can also be organized thematically to increase that choice for the child. So everybody might want to read a book this month about animals. It could be fictional, it could be non-fiction, and the theme is animal. We can get some thematic questions for discussion rather than everybody reading the same thing. And of course, there are online book clubs that kids can join. So you might find that if you look online, there might be international book clubs where children across the whole world are reading the same book and have opportunities to discuss together. Catherine says at school we have library and reading club as well, so they can arrange book discussions. Yes. Okay. Fabulous. Um, if you do have access to public libraries, encouraging children to make sure that they are a member of the library. Go down there, see what's available. My Saturday trips to the library were a highlight of my childhood. And I can see that someone has shared that physical books are still selling better than ebooks. And I agree, that's a very happy thing. And of course, the final thing that we can encourage parents to do when it comes to making sure that children have an ability to access reading is to normalize reading. Now, what do we mean by this? It's something that came out in the beginning of our chats in terms of time and other things that take up our time. Obviously, I was a child in the 1980s. Back in those days, there were not so many computer games. There was no social media. I had less television available to me. Books were one of my only entertainment factors, and for me, reading was normal. If I was on a bus, I read a book. If I was waiting in the dentist or the doctor, I read a book. If my mum had to go and chat to her friend, I would read a book. Um, and I think that this is something that we can do. Um, as I was always told, you're never bored if you've got a book with you. So encouraging parents to, when they're leaving the house, just pop a book in the bag. It's always better to have one than not to. Um, Naleen mentioning reading corners and a library, fantastic, and a reading garden. Oh, that sounds wonderful. Is that reading garden in your school? That sounds like a lovely place to visit. Yeah, it absolutely does vary where you are in the world as to how much access there is to English books. Um, Ooh, Sanabar, well, you won a grant for a school library. I bet that was a wonderful, wonderful grant for the school to receive. Okay, so let's move on to other more tangible support for parents. Right now, you've all mentioned concerns and anxieties of parents. What are you doing to support them? So, okay. Nalene says blocks and bricks as games for reading. Absolutely. Do you teach those games to parents? Oh, I bet it was motivational. Or that would be like my dream day in a school. Um, yeah. So what are we doing currently to help parents to support reading at home? Let's see what the chat box comes up with. We've certainly recognized that there is a need for support with parents. Let me see what you are doing. So set an argument, let them read to argue against you. Fantastic. Okay, so Tanu mentions suggesting the right age level of books to the parents, sharing links with parents. Fantastic. Monitoring reading with the reading log. Yep. Sending books home once a week. Homework is for the child to read to an adult aloud. Okay. Do we set limits on how much we want them to read here, or are we just saying read something, anything, please? Um, Encouraging parents to be a storyteller in the school. Fantastic. So bringing that parent into the fold as well. Also common for Liliana as well. Grading books according to age groups. Fabulous. Reading ladders. Extensive easy readers, age appropriate, plan how, when, what amount of reading to do. Okay. Ooh, Trudy brings up the question, what if the parents have reading challenges? Absolutely. Um, Encouraging parents to develop reading habits for their children by helping them to understand how important reading is. Brilliant. Okay. And automatically enrolling in the public library. All right. So let's have a think about 4 things that we can do to support parents. Well, I think firstly, as with anything, as language teachers, we say this all the time, but open communication, communicating with parents. Why do we want them to read? What are we trying to achieve? Sharing those objectives, sharing that knowledge that we have as teachers with parents. Um, Providing language support. We will talk a little bit about that more in a second, but there are things that we can do, whether that's, sharing key words with parents, or whether that's simply talking to them about the fact that they don't need to understand English to support reading. They can ask their child questions about the book in their mother tongue, in L1, which the child can answer in L1. The reading will have been done in English, and that's enough. The parents can have those discussions and be supportive in L1 if they need to be. Sharing activity ideas. Share 1 or 2 of your favorite simple reading games or book activities that parents can do at home. And then, of course, maintaining that communication, having constant updates with the schools and the parents, between the school and the parents, making sure that, during parents meetings, during face-to-face situations, during portfolio days, or whenever you get together with the parents in the school, that you have those opportunities to talk to them. So how can we support that? I think the key message, number one, that we need to share is parents do not need English fluency to support their child's reading. You, as I've said, can ask questions in L1 about an L2 book. Other things that we can do, we can provide cheat sheets. So, um, putting down on paper the sort of questions you might ask your students in English and an L1 translation for the parents as well. So, you know, what are you reading? How would you say that in L1? Do you like the book? And you can give them some simple key language that they can use to build their confidence up, questions that they can ask. Also, the other thing that I found really, really helps is providing just an L1 summary of the book. Just giving a little snapshot summary of the sorts of things that the book is talking about. So, if you're reading a book about um, animal habitats, like we were talking about the other day, then you can give a highlight of some of the key animals that are mentioned and where they live. Just a little summary of what's happening. Sanabal suggests sharing the most attractive passages with a translation. Absolutely. So, just to clarify, when we're talking about L1, language one, that's your mother tongue. So, for me, that's English. L2, is the language that you're learning L3, L4, L5. So if we're talking about looking at an English book and you're in a Spanish speaking country, parents will be L1 Spanish speakers, L2 will then be English. Hope that clarifies. All right. So, types of activities that we can do. A few activities that I have found work well with parents, little ways that they can encourage reading. Um, a simple activity that they can do, it's a nice craft activity, designing a new cover for the book. It's not language dependent. The parents don't need to have English to be able to do this. This is a discussion that can happen. So you might have a talk with the child. What's your book about? What's the important ideas in it? Let's design a new cover. Draw that together, and it gives that opportunity for talking. Making a reading den. Nothing better than taking all the cushions off the sofa, making somewhere nice and comfortable together, mother, father, child, all together, making a reading den, then getting in it to read. It's a nice way of focusing the child into reading. Um, Another nice technique that they can use, substituting the names of the characters. So while the child is reading the book with their parents, change the name of the characters to the names of people in your family. It's nothing overly challenging, but it can bring some humor and it can bring some entertainment. Um, Adding in actions. And this is something, again, that's language independent. So you can choose with the child the characters in the story. Let's say we're reading Three Billy Goats Gruff. I say this because this was one of my favorite stories as a child. So, having in actions or sound effects that you can do in repeated parts of the story. So, if you're familiar with the story of the Three Billy Goats Gruff, there is a repeated part of the story where one by one the goats go over the bridge and meet the troll. So we can have different little actions that we do. So we might have a sign for troll, or we might have an action for the goat crossing the bridge. Same thing with the story of the three little pigs. Again, there's repeated parts of the story. So if there are any repeated elements within the story, adding in actions and movements. Um, and of course, helping them with discussion questions. Now, we talked a little bit last week about how the Talk About Texts teachers' books have some really great comprehension questions in them embedded into the page. And again, these are things that we can share. We can translate these questions and we can share them. And of course, reminding the parents they can talk about these discussion questions in the native language. And of course, Russell says making their own books. Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about having reading digital reading platforms and making digital books online. That's something that we can do with the parents, of course. Now, we've talked a little bit about encouraging that, and I think we need to be realistic. We are teachers. We want to know that improvement is happening. And often, when it comes to reading at home, we feel like we need some oversight of what's happening. Also, for many of us, the reality of school oversight means that we might be told that we need to keep reading logs, make sure that we are monitoring the children's reading at home. So, how can we do that effectively? Um, yeah, we've talked about how it reading for pleasure, but we need to be able to make sure that we're tracking something. How do we know they are really, really reading? Well, a few little things that we can do in the classroom that are independent of the books. So, read and tell. Like show and tell, except we're talking about a book. There are all sorts of different reading discussion activities that we could do in a reading circle or in circle time at school. Um, Remember, when it comes to talking about independent reading, we're in a situation where the students are not all reading the same books. So our read and tell have to be general questions. We might be talking just generally, tell me one interesting thing about the book you are reading. It might be talk about your favorite character, as Tapu has suggested there. It could be talking about what's your favorite moment of the story? What was the scariest thing that you learnt in the book? What was the most interesting sentence? We can choose any generalized area for a read and tell activity that can be book independent. Um, Book reviews, of course, coming out in a million and one different ways, and there are some brilliantly creative ideas. A friend of mine who teaches third grade absolutely loves the hamburger book review. So you make your nice design on shapes of hamburgers, and you might use the top bun to talk about the plot. The burger in the middle describes the character, and then your review in the bottom half of the bun, for example. Liliana has used the hamburger model. There are lots of different ones. Um, Book reviews, of course, can also be nice and simple. Um, so a 4 sentence review is quite a nice one for primary age students. You might choose a simple who, what, when, where review structure. So, who is the book about? 1 sentence. What is the story about? Where is the story set? When is the story set? Simple 4 sentence review. And then you can do a nice little summary at the end of whether you liked it or not. Book recommendations, absolutely brilliant thing to do. Talk to your friend, tell them one book you read and what you like about it, or having nice posters up in the classroom of different recommendations that you can use. So, this week we are reading this book. Do you like it? Yes or no? Would you recommend it? Absolutely or absolutely not. And the last one is a technique that has started becoming very, very popular here in the UK. It's DEAR, or DEAR. Does anybody know what this one stands for? It is an acronym. I will pop it in the chat box in a minute. Let's see. Haha, there we go. Shermine is indeed familiar. Drop everything and read, indeed. So, dear time. For those of you that are not familiar, essentially, this is 10 to 20 minutes once per week, scheduled time where you don't do anything except for read. And that includes the teacher. So everybody packs away absolutely everything else they are doing and takes out their book. They quietly read in the classroom. Even the teacher is quietly reading. And this is a great technique for promoting reading and making reading seem important to children. It's got to be important. It's what we're doing in the classroom. But you get to bring in your own book from home, and you just do 10 to 20 minutes of quiet reading. Everybody reading quietly in the classroom at the same time. Now, we are coming up to the end of our session, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions today. Oh, so many good words. All right. Book speed dating. I love it. 2 minutes to share a good book instead of sharing things about yourself. Absolutely. So, working in pairs in the classroom, 5 minutes talking together, switch to your next partner, talk to someone else, talk to someone else, talk to someone else, move that around. Okay, so we use that at school, but instead the teacher passes around each student and helps them or listens. That's absolutely brilliant. But don't forget, teachers should get to read too. And part of Dear, part of the message of Dear is that reading is important enough that the teacher should be doing it too. Okay, all right. So, teacher and student swapping. Brilliant. All right. Okay. So, a final thought for the end of our session and the end of our 4 sessions. How can we get better at reading? Well, the answer to that, I think, is this poster: 10 ways to become a better reader. Absolutely. 10 ways to become a better reader. Well, number one, read. And that's really it, And I think that that is also the benefit of Dear. It puts that importance on it as well. If our students want to get better at reading, the best thing for them to do is read. Right, we've got just under 10 minutes available. So if you have any questions about what we have been discussing today or anything else that has come up in the session so far, I feel free to put that in the chat box and we will start discussing those. Coming back to that question from earlier regarding agency. So learner agency essentially is ownership and control over what you are learning. From a child's perspective, when we're talking about young learners, the level of agency can remain the same as at any grade. What they are able to do, of course, will vary by their developmental stage. So, when we're talking about learner agency in the primary classroom, when it comes to reading, we're talking about the ability for them to choose what they want to read and being able to read that independently. So, when it comes to building learner agency, we're talking about giving the children the skills they need to be able to read independently and to make choices about their own reading for themselves. When do we drop everything and read most effectively? Um, it will totally depend on your week and how your lessons are set up. I generally recommend sort of end of class time. So choosing one of your lessons in a week and taking that sort of 10-20 minutes during that lesson just to read. I like it at the end of the week because obviously, we're moving towards that weekend relaxation. But of course, that is going to be completely up to you and will vary from teacher to teacher, school to school. Yeah. Any other questions coming through? How can we get in touch with upcoming webinar sources? So, at the end of our well, I'll pop it up now. So you can learn all about Macmillan's upcoming webinars for the international curriculum on the macmillanic.com/webinars. You'll find that there. In terms of me, I am not very social media active, but you can connect on LinkedIn to find out what I am doing. As in the chat box, do keep up to date on the social media channels with Macmillan as well for upcoming webinars as well. Any more questions coming through? Just basically people going, can we please get some slides? Yeah, they can be a little delayed sometimes, but I'm sure that if you use the email address on the screen, so international.curriculum@macmillaneducation.com, if you don't get things through, do drop them an email. Could you send us some interesting web pages? Ooh, web pages about what? I believe there is a little pack coming out, isn't there, at the end of these with some useful resources for the teachers?
That's correct. Yep. Keep an eye out for that, everyone. Yep.
Yep. So there will be some nice links in there and some useful reading material. In terms of other things, I think that there are some really useful stuff on some of the BBC education program, BBC education pages for working with children and reading recommendations as well. I'm a big fan of the BBC pages. Uh-huh. Apparently, I've now Reham is asking for all sorts of different skills. I'm available. Just have to talk to Macmillan nicely. There you go. And a few couple of yes, the BBC is great comments. Absolutely. Yes. All right. So,
I think we can
any more
probably
questions?
wrap up soon.
I think so too. It's mainly
Anyone?
just thank yous and goodbyes coming
Yeah,
through at
lots of
this point.
lovely feedback,
Mm.
which is
But a
always nice.
huge thank you to the teachers from me as well. I always say a webinar only goes well if the people in the chat box are happy to share their ideas and their expertise as well. Yeah, I'm
Definitely.
sure between us, we've got what 150 people ish in here today. That's a lot of teaching experience in one room, isn't it? So
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this week. It's been fantastic to see so many people. And as Charlotte said, so many people getting involved. It's great to hear everyone's experiences with reading. And yeah, it's been really lovely. Thank you, Charlotte, for taking the time to join us and run the sessions. I hope everyone's found them informative. And I hope if you haven't already, you've had a look at our Talk About Text series on our website, which is on the screen now.
yes.
Please do have a look if you haven't already. It's a great series. And
And
yeah,
also from
go
all of us, a big thank you to Catherine for getting us through all of these
thank you,
sessions,
Charlotte.
working in the background. It's all run perfectly smoothly. So that's a huge thank you to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. No, thank you very much. I mean, yeah, without you, there would be no webinar. So I could not run the webinar that you've done. So thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a great week. So I've seen a lot of questions in the chat box about slides. There will be another email going out in the next 24 hours with all of the slides from all of the sessions and all of the recordings, all of the links to the recordings. So if you don't receive that in the next 24 hours, just drop us an email. We can share them with you there because we wouldn't want anyone to not have them. So please do. And yeah, you will get a certificate straight after the session.
Yeah.
Um,
And take a screenshot of all of these contact details just in case you need them.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. That's a good idea. That's a great
Yeah.
idea. And also, yeah, if you're not following us on our social channels, please do have a look at Macmillan International Curriculum. Give us a follow. And yeah, I think if no one has any more questions, hopefully we'll be seeing you at future webinars. Please do keep an eye out on our social media channels and on our website for updates on future sessions, which there definitely will be. And we hope to see you again soon. And thank you for taking the time again, everyone, for joining us. It's been great. And I think we can probably close off the session now.
Yeah.
Charlotte,
Thank you,
any
everybody.
last words?
No, just thank you, everybody. Have a great week of teaching. And we'll see you until the next webinar. Yeah.
Yeah,
As Judy
definitely.
says, be safe.
Exactly. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, hopefully see you all very soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.